Are we recording?
I am recording.
All right. Welcome back to the second part of our contract-based testing episode. So, in the first part, we talked about what actually is contract-based testing and how can it help you, or is it at least supposed to help you test in isolation where you normally need a copy of production or something like that. And then we talked a bit about how you can actually do contract-based testing or get the benefits without actually having artifacts involved and having CI pipelines. Because in the end, it's all about communicating properly between different teams. And it's at this point, I think that we kind of wrapped up the first part. And Mykola, you had a angle that you wanted to explore
Yes,
further.
I have this mental exercise, a mental model, when I was trying to wrap my mind around the contract-based testing, what it is not, where is its value. So I was thinking at some point about the schema, especially in the XML world. If you remember, we used to have XSDs, which would be our contract, which can also be checked at runtime, because you can apply the schema and whether you satisfy the schema or not in your response or request. And then sometimes we would go even further. We would generate our DTOs, our objects that we're sending over the wire in our Java application, for example, from the schema, so it will be API driven. And that had worked to some extent, we can argue. But what is the difference? To me, the first difference for me with the contract-based testing, especially consumer-based, is that we have those contracts, not just one schema, but multiple fine-tuned, saying, okay, in this situation, I expect this schema to be followed. Or maybe, depending on what kind of interactions you have, it might be not based on the situation, but who is calling. For this consumer, for this supplier, I expect this data to be present because I don't care about the rest. What do you think about this so far?
Indeed, in the end, the structure is a big part of it. But I think where contract tests differ from structure definitions, schema definitions, is that it's truly about test cases. About if I ask for A, I expect B or A, and if I ask for A prime, I expect C. I don't know. And so that's really about validating. Like at the producer side, you say if someone asks me for this, I will give them this, and at the consumer side is uh, if I ask for this, I will get that. So it's really a shared test case between different systems.
That's interesting because while preparing to this episode, well, I don't do much preparation. I don't want to oversaturate my mind with the proper definition. I want to come with from our context. But when browsing a little bit, I saw many discussions and many blog posts that says that contract-based testing is not a functional testing. It's not an end-to-end testing. But when we're saying that we are starting to test these values, that means it's already we're getting a little bit in the side of the functional testing. So it's probably a little bit closer to the functional. And that triggers me also a little bit because when I was asking people, my colleagues, other people I know about their experience with contract-based testing, those who implemented it and were quite enthusiastic initially, and then people were not very happy about the results in the return on investment and what it ended up with. And one of the common complaints was that they are becoming more functional tests, and that's why it's becoming more difficult to maintain them. Do you think it's a little bit shifting towards the functional testing? Do you think it can be too far to the functional testing side?
Yeah, I'm quite curious about these articles that say that it shouldn't be functional testing, because in my mental model, it is a replacement for a shared integration test that works with a single functional case over different systems. And so if you make it just a structure test, where it's just a validation of what is in a in the response, then indeed I don't see a difference between an API spec and a contract test. So, and I think an API spec is probably a better solution to that problem.
Okay, so what we are saying that contract tests, they are basically distributed functional tests. Distributed in a sense that they are executed separately on the consumer and on the supplier side without both of them running in parallel.
Yes, but they are coordinated. So if something changes on either side, then that communication between the two systems is guaranteed through the system.
Okay, that probably closer to what it is really, not what is in my mental model. But how does it work for you? Do you have experience with the contract-based testing?
I've tried to implement it once in one of our teams, and well, actually twice. But the first one we just gave up early because we couldn't get the collaboration with other teams to work properly, and we had other priorities, of course. And the second time, I think we ended up with something that was more like a structure test, and that gave us lots of issues in. Well, we had to create all kinds of complex matchers in the contract for like this needs to be a UUID and this needs to be a date between that range or something like that. And I think we went wrong there, and because the dream is consumer driven contracts, but I think what we ended up with was basically externally mounted integration tests. So we were running the tests and we exposed a contract artifact, but our consumers did not run those tests on their end, which means that the contracts were optimized for what we needed, and there were no actual test cases there that our consumers needed. And so then you have a shared repository, for example, where you have this contract, and we made changes there, and the consumers had rights to change there, but for them it was just something extra that they had to change that didn't give them any benefit. So I think where we never ended up was that we really got that collaboration done so that we both run them and that we both get the benefits of a push and pull innovation through the contract.
Yeah. That's another thing that I hear and see also often. It's about the engagement. I rarely see, at least in my experience, in my circle, that both consumers and producers would be interested. Usually it's only one part that has a strong interest and strong maybe need in that. In my experience also, we had a couple of cases where someone would come to us and say, actually we were producers even, and they would say, yeah, we're consumers, we're building consumer-based tests for us. We'll say, okay, yeah, fine, if you really want to put it here into this repository, and then we never look on that because we don't change our things so often. There is no indeed incentive. I don't see in my work how these tests would make things significantly different. And I wanted to hear from others, and so far I don't hear many success user stories. I used to hear a lot of hype when we were going to the conferences. All the way to you go to microservices, you need to do the contract-based testing. And I said, okay, we're actually doing microservices. Now we're really doing microservices. And we don't do, and it's fine. And those who do, they complain that it's not working yet for various reasons. One small thing, I just noticed that I didn't turn my video on at the beginning. I turned somewhere in the between, but I think we will still have the communication as it is. We'll just have a static image of me with with some kind of caption like this: Isel could not start his video on time. Yes. I can make a loop like this. Anyway.
That's hilarious. Okay. You were saying I've never seen it work, and in our microservice environments, I don't see the need. But at Bol.com, we have a basically split environment. We have lots of pretty microservices in the cloud, and we have a bunch of less micro services on in our own data center running. And in our own data center, we have a basically two copy of production environments, test and acceptance. And in the cloud, we have a single copy of production environments called staging. And there is still quite a lot of tests that run on these environments, and I think there's quite a few teams that depend on the tests that run in these shared environments, because I regularly see people complaining, hey, you broke your test environment, you broke your acceptance environment, and our tests are failing. And I think this problem is precisely what contract tests are supposed to fix. And since we still have that problem, I don't think we haven't found the proper solution yet. And since we're not doing contract testing yet, maybe that is the solution that can help the people that still depend on the availability of this production-like environment to move to a more isolated test strategy.
I see what you mean. I think, okay, I don't think this is really this problem of testing on those non-production environments would be solved by the contract testing, and that comes back to our definition: what the contract-based testing is and what is not, and how deep does it go. Because yes, we have still those tests. Although I should say, in the teams I was working with and in the teams around me, we would end up a couple of years ago ditching all the tests on those environments. And in my personal practice, in my anecdotal experience, when you just do proper testing in isolation, when you can prove that your system is working based on the assumption of the rest of the systems, you can well enough, then you reach 80% of the confidence level, however hypothetical confidence level, and those remaining 20%, those are tricky to test anyway or they depend really on the behavior of the real systems. And there, I doubt whether the contract test will really help, because as I was mentioning in the first part, in my experience, the problem with the structure, and I still think a little bit contract testing, a little bit more focused on the structure. Maybe it's wrong. The problem of structure is not that big. So probably we can ditch this and say, okay, following your definition from earlier this episode, contract-based testing are really looking into the functional aspects. Fine. But then I have a different problem about the depth of those tests. Because especially in the microservice environment, you have, in my experience, rarely the case that you're talking to some other collaborator in a very simple CRUD interface where you put something and get back something. You don't have control on one of the sides, usually. Or often, let me put often enough to be a problem. And that means that you are saying, okay, somehow this data is getting there and I am requesting it. So we're starting to get into the question, how does the data get there? And you mentioned in the previous part that we have also the way in the contract testing to define our given to put the data there. That's fine, but in the complex microservices, there are usually multiple ways that are coming from different services to get the data in, maybe even from the partners. But okay, partners is more complicated stuff. Let's focus on our systems. So there are many ways how this data is getting, many rules, and when you're testing, you make an assumptions. So you're making assumptions. You're just pushing your assumptions on what will be the state, how the collaborator will reach the state. You're pushing it from the boundary of your call maybe to the next. And if you want to push it even further, then suddenly you're starting to do end-to-end testing, which we definitely don't want to do with the contract-based testing. And that's my conceptual problem with the contract-based testing in the major microservices environment, which is changing, fluctuating often. Like you can get delivery from supplier coming completely different ways from different warehouses in my examples.
So if I try to rephrase that, your problem is that the state that the consumer expects in the producer is basically non-deterministic in a chaotic environment.
I'm not talking here about eventual consistency even. That's yet another beast. But the thing is that when I have my tests in isolation, not contract tests or not formal defined contract tests, so I am working very carefully about my assumptions. So these are my assumptions on the boundary, so the things which I worked, and the rest is integration test or unit test. This is there I'm testing my implementation. So I'm focusing on my assumptions, and with the contract-based testing, I don't see these assumptions are going away. They might go a little one step further. And then maybe in a bigger environments, like what we were starting to build at bol.com, when we started to disassemble monoliths, the first generation of the services, they were quite big. And there you don't have that many collaborators. Maybe there it made sense because you're talking to something what is fully responsible for the data streams. Then maybe it would have worked. But when you start to really go into microservices, those bigger services start to split off, and you're talking to the first collaborator, but they are aggregating potentially a network of other things around them, and you're not solving, in my opinion, this way the fundamental problem. You're just pushing a little bit further the area of your confidence from your own service to the next collaborator, but probably not further.
But if the owners of that service push their confidence to the next further, then you get a chain, right, of confidence.
Yes, but here comes the question: how high is this confidence, and with those, how accurate those givens for your case.
Yeah, but still, pushing that confidence one step out is should lead to a higher level of confidence than not pushing it out.
Perhaps. That's why I'm not saying that. I would not say that this is a lie and completely bad idea. I just don't see it realistically working, and I don't know, well, realistically in the environments where I was working, for example, because it would require too much synchronization, and we value the team independence and their focus, and you need really this network effect for everyone to do this, to see whether your assumption or our assumption will work, that you will get higher levels of confidence. And then you also depend on the weakest chains in your
so I think also what you're saying is that for that last 20% of confidence, it's easier to get your monitoring on production right and your instant handling and deployment strategy so that you can fix things quickly. That's easier to do with more team autonomy than it is to coordinate contract testing.
Yes, I think so, and that's probably will be the gist of my problem with the contract-based testing. I think you're correct in this way.
So it's kind of like a red herring on a road to the right approach to quality. As in,
it's not. Yeah, I would not say. I would not say red herring.
Really get you there.
It is situation dependent. So in some situations, it is much more difficult to achieve than in the other, because in some companies you have techs much more synchronized and more top down. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just different. And there maybe it would work easy, because you're coming and say, okay, everybody has to do this contract-based testing, whether you want to not. Then you go into potentially other problems, like you depend on the weakest chain in your whole contract chains. But maybe that would work. Whereas in the
Yes, so Sorry, I think we've been
Yeah,
talking
I was also
quite a
looking
bit
on the
about
time
this now,
because
and
yes, we need to start.
yeah, yeah, and I think the really interesting thing is that we've both tried or seen people try and failed to get it really right. I'd love to get a perspective of someone who has it, who is doing it, and is still really enthusiastic about it.
Yes, that would be really good. That's what I'm looking forward as well. Not
So,
ideally not only enthusiastic
exactly.
but
So
also can prove the value. But okay, at least enthusiastic. It's
yeah, no, just enthusiastic is a great start, and then if they can maintain that enthusiasm through our doubts, I think that's a great case. So let's see if we can find someone who
yes,
does
and
that.
if you
And
watching this
exactly,
know how it
exactly.
should work and have it working
Yeah.
or so at least working, we would like really to
Yes.
hear in comments or any other
Definitely.
ways of contact us.
And maybe if you like to engage with us in the discussion on what we've done wrong on our end, or just are missing in our discussion, then we'd love to hear that from you.
Good.